up, we do have Joe May presenting about his very varied career. And I will just let him take it away.
Okay, well, thank you and good afternoon. I'm Joe May and I'm physically located in Leesburg, Virginia, as we're speaking. And certainly my privilege and satisfaction to be a part of this afternoon. Let me just start off by saying that there was a newspaper article a couple of years ago and about me, and it said, first, last, Joe May, first, last, and always an engineer. And my kids have liked that so well that they said they wanted to be my epitaph. And I say only, just not too soon. So I'm an electrical engineering graduate from Virginia Tech. And I've had so far a 58-year career in electrical engineering. I've had a certain amount of success in inventing things, and I have 28 patents at this point, and I actually have 2 which are on file and I expect to be granted. So I'm hoping to finish with at least 30 patents at the end of my career. I just should mention that I was born and raised a farmer and down in the Shenandoah Valley. And I frankly was a really poor high school student. And in fact, first of all, there's the school that I attended, Orval Grade School, 7 grades and 37 pupils. But before you dismiss it totally, they did produce 2 superintendents of school. While I was attending there, it turned out 2 superintendents of schools, Louisa County and Rockingham County, 2 members of Virginia House of Delegates, valedictorian of a high school, and so on. So it doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's sure a lot harder when you don't have really nice facilities or resources. By the way, the report card there is an example of my senior year. It's my plane geometry report card, and the highest grade on there is a C, but there's a note on the bottom that says passing grade was given. So I didn't exactly set the world on fire in high school. In fact, in my spring of my senior year, I was caught smoking a tobacco cigarette, and the principal suspended me. He said, "Go, you know the rules, go get your stuff." And so there's spring of my senior year, and I'm out of school. Anyway, I'll talk about that just a tiny bit later. Anyway, so how did I end up in Leesburg? Well, I entered the service right out of high school because that was part of my getting back into high school. And I attended electronics school and service, and after the service went to Virginia Tech, and I did much better in electrical engineering there in the years following my time in the service. I had to put myself through because I missed the GI Bill. And I was a residence counselor and a summer intern for 2 summers at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And I really found my calling during that period at Virginia Tech and of course at Johns Hopkins. So that doesn't quite get me to Leesburg, but after I graduated from Tech, I went to work for DuPont at their experimental station in Wilmington, Delaware. And I received my first 3 patents there in the first 6 years. So I was finally beginning to become convinced that maybe there's a future for me in engineering. Left there and became an electronic equipment salesman for 2 years. And then I became an engineering supervisor for a rail research firm for 3 years. Then 4 years as a self-employed technical consultant. I refer to it as being a technical hired gun, but basically people hired me for my engineering skills and they would be short-term jobs. And then 44 years ago, I started EIT, and the way I came to start it was that part of my technical consulting had required me to design 2 instruments that DuPont sold in the workplace to monitor the safety of workers. And my job was to design it and go away. And they called me and said, hey, if a little company was to spring up down in Virginia to build these things, we'd probably look favorably on them. And that was in March, and I said, don't think so. But I called them back in November, and they looked favorably enough to give me a contract for $83,000 worth of the things that I had designed. And that was the start of EIT. So anyway, and we've been at EIT, which stands for Electronic Instrumentation and Technology, for 44 years. We're a company of about 250, 270 people, and we have revenues of 45 million or so. I still own the company. However, as a sideline, in 1994 through 2014, I served in the Virginia House of Delegates, and what was I doing in politics? Beats me, because I couldn't think of a worse choice, but honestly enjoyed it and felt like I was able to contribute to the overall well-being of my community, my state, and the country. So enjoyed it, but not always. So the question was asked, what's your job? Well, I own the company, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer here, but basically I'm an electrical engineer with a pretty broad scientific background. And of course, I'm a business owner, and that's separate and distinct from being an engineer. And I count myself as a public service servant because I get involved in a lot of public service activities. I'll mention a few of those because they're frankly along the lines or consistent with some of the things that I think you all are doing. My company, which is EIT, designs and builds electronic equipment for basically other people. About 30% of our revenues are medical electronics, blood chemistry, electrophysiology, cardiology. The test that if you go into the emergency room and they want to know if you've had a heart attack, it looks for the presence or absence of a certain enzyme that would be present if you had a heart attack. You ask what my job requires. Well, frankly, a pretty high level of math skills and all the basic sciences, and frankly, the ability to read and write acceptably well. I've never met engineers that I would recommend for light reading, but the ability to deal with the English language at an understandable level is really a requirement for being a good engineer. Like, concentration and hard work are really required. What excites me professionally, and
I'm gonna check something real quick.
okay, can you stand fast for just a moment while we, frankly, this has always excited me, still does, and that's working on a problem that has required excessive effort to deal with, and then producing an economical and convenient solution to the problem. And I can give you two examples. One's the
So I want to interrupt very briefly. On our screen share, we can't see the slide that you have.
oh, okay.
I just want to let you know.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
You'll give us a moment here.
Oh yeah, of course.
Look down a little bit. Okay, good.
How's that?
Yep, great. Okay. I picked out two examples of things that I really enjoyed. Can I have the next slide? That's the track curvature computer and road octane computer. By the way, the track curvature computer depends on the chain rule of derivatives, and that's only 2 times in my career could I ever remember using the chain rule of derivatives. Anybody remember chain rule of derivatives? Okay. The problem that we were attacking was measuring the curvature of railroad tracks, and the way you used to do it, and which I was doing in July of 1970, was you stretch a 62-foot long string along the head of the rail. You measure how far it is from the string to the head of the rail. A third guy writes down what that reading was, and so you got 1, 2, 3, 4 people and you do it every foot along the track. So that means if you're doing 2 miles, which is about the limit of what we could do in a day, you did 10,000 deep knee bends. So I can tell you right off the bat that that makes you inventive. So I ended up, I said, boy, there has to be a better way. So I ended up designing an electronic computer, which used a rate of turn gyro and a distance measuring device, and using the chain rule of derivatives, because the output of the two devices are time-based derivatives, and what I needed was a distance-based derivative. We ended up with a track curvature computer, and it's still a federal standard. The car you see on the left is a rail test car that Metro and DC uses, and they have a track curvature computer in it. So very proud of that. Not so much because of selling it to the Metro, but because we avoided 10,000 deep knee bends a day. So can I have the next one? And this is probably my proudest, I guess I would say the invention that gives me the most satisfaction is the road octane computer. Next time you fill up with gas, look on the face of the gas pump and you'll see the minimum octane rating R plus M over 2 method. And the reason by the way, what this does is take the octane rating of gasoline that's being blended, and it keeps it right at whatever the prescribed quantity is, so that when you drive in and you fill up, if your car only requires 87, not to worry, you just buy 87. And if you need premium, you know that you can get premium at 91 octane. And you say, why do you care? Well, the difference is about 50 cents a gallon. So if you're overbuying octane, you're just wasting your money. That's about 50 cents a gallon difference, considering that there are 2 trillion gallons of gasoline pumped in the world every year. That can amount to a substantial amount of money. And yes, it's in every country. So I get a great deal of satisfaction out of it, not because I make a lot of money. In fact, I got $1 in other valuable consideration, but the satisfaction was in doing an ugly job much better and saving people a lot of money. Right. So I was asked, what can teachers do to support students interested in STEM professions? And that's something that's really important to me, because quite frankly, America's dominance in the world is in great part centered or depends on our ability to be super competitive in the technology arena. And without it, we won't be the country that we've gotten used to it being. There are a number of efforts out there which are aimed toward assisting STEM programs, and I'll mention a couple that I'm familiar with, in part because I helped start them. One is the VAST program, which is Virginia Aerospace Science and Technology students, which we started at NASA Langley, let's see, 12 years ago. And there we take rising seniors. They take an online course for 5 months, and the best students, the best 180, 160 students come to NASA Langley for a week, and they get an opportunity to actually work alongside the people who are doing space developments. I got a chance to fly the simulator that Neil Armstrong trained for landing on the moon. And by the way, I landed it successfully. It's sort of funny, but Senator Colgan, who started Colgan Airways, crashed the lunar simulator. I didn't let him forget that. BLAST is another situation, another STEM activity, and in that case, teachers and guidance counselors, particularly STEM teachers, try to pick out students that they think would benefit from being exposed to what's available at the university level. So 10th or 11th grade student comes to like Virginia Tech and spends 3 or 4 days living in the dorm, visiting the various departments to see what the various disciplines do or are involved in as part of being a, let's say, an electrical engineer. And I was able to get permanent funding for the VAST program while I was in the General Assembly, and the same for the BLAST program. The pathways to engineering started 2 years ago at Virginia Tech, and in that case, we're attempting to identify those students who are first generation and who do not appear to be on a path in going to college, particularly to get a technical degree. And we select roughly 120 to come to Virginia Tech, their 10th year, 11th year, 12th year, and we still follow them into their senior year. We've only been into it 3 years, so it'll be a little while before we see any graduates from the program. The real objective here is to identify basically what I would call diamonds in the rough, kids who probably have the skills but probably don't have the wherewithal. If you're looking for, and by the way, the May Family Foundation has underwritten that program. So science fairs are really a good place for you to work. You'll learn a lot, and so will the kids learn a lot. I have to tell a quick story. I had a young man who was showing me his science project, and he was very, very, very pleased with himself. And he started telling me without me asking him what he was doing. And it was a pretty good project. And he stopped in mid-sentence and he said, "Do you understand a word I'm saying?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Well, you sure didn't look like it." And I said, "You misused the word equilibrate," and I was trying to decide whether to correct you or not. So the education actually goes both ways there. I got put in my place a little bit also. Running out of time?
Yeah.
Okay. Technology internships. There's a group here in Virginia, and it's run by the Virginia Space Grant Consortium. And Mary Sandy is the person who is responsible for that group. I would suggest that if you're looking for technology internships, that you talk to Mary to see what might be worked out. And of course, technology mentoring scholarships. I don't know of any formal programs, but I know that, well, a group called Loudon Laurels does mentoring for certain groups. And I, as part of EIT activities, have a substantial number of young students, either pre-engineering or post-engineering or during engineering, stop by and visit me here at EIT because this is about engineering. And I'd actually recommend the space camps. I took my grandson to space camp twice, and we both enjoyed it a great deal, and it was very educational. And I guess best of all, you can find your own opportunities to be mentoring. And if you have a background in technology of any sort, I'll guarantee you the kids will benefit from having the association with you. So anyway, I like to watch for kids that I think have potential, and I like to work with them. I was going to give you an example or two that we have here, but I'll leave well enough alone. This, by the way, is Mary Sandy at VAST, because Mary, Sandy, and Lisa Rowe used to be the director of NASA Langley, were actually the people who organized the VAST program, and I think has made it pretty successful. And I do a fair amount of speaking to various groups. This is me speaking to a NASA group in Richmond when I was a member of the General Assembly. And this is the Pathways program at Virginia Tech. And it's a little early, but so far it looks like it's going to be very, very good. we're able to bring the parents into it. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of the parents have never been inside a college grounds. And it's satisfying to see them, how proud they are of their kids, but also just proud that here they are and they're a part of it. So. Let me talk just very briefly about inventing. Some of your students may have the potential in the area of inventing. I've done a presentation lots and lots and lots of times that's ambitiously titled Inventing America, in which I talk about inventing and some of the things that I've invented and basically what's required and what's the good side and what's the bad side of it. More than happy to come to your school and present it. I've done it at least 12 times, no, more than that, at NASA Langley, and certainly at Virginia Tech, I don't know, 4 or 5 times for the various programs, UVA and Old Dominion, and kids seem to react to it pretty favorably. And then we here at EIT are developing new instruments all the time. In fact, we're just inventing one for aviation, particularly for helicopters, and its origin is sort of, to me, novel. I decided at age 73 I was going to get my license to fly helicopters, and I have to admit that that's not a very large population of students. And we were out training at night, and I had to demonstrate night auto rotations. Now, let me tell you how, if you don't know, let me tell you how you do a night auto rotation. You climb up to about 1,000 feet, you're flying forward about 100 knots, you turn the engine off, and if you do it right, you descend pretty rapidly. When you get about 50 feet above the ground, you flare and arrest the forward motion and then settle to the ground. That is, if you do it right. If you wait too late, you fly into the ground. If you flare too early, you run out of energy and you smush into the ground, neither of which are desirable. So I've been doing that one evening, and my knees were shaking so badly that I said, I've had enough for this evening. So as I'm walking across the runway, I'm thinking there has to be a better way. So I ended up taking the radar out of a Mercedes car, and it looks at traffic in front of you, but it looks down at the ground to tell you how high you are above the ground. So we have a nice little system that keeps track of the fact that you're doing an auto rotation, calls out the critical altitudes so that you know when to flare, and it makes auto rotations a lot more fun. So anyway, we're working on some of that stuff, and in fact, we were just down writing the ads for it right now because it's just been released. So anyway, quite willing to share that with kids who want to come by here and look at it, or even talk to them about it. Very quickly, there are 3 people in my life who helped me a great deal, and there are people who are very much in the same position that I think you all are. One was J. Frank Hilliard, who was the principal of our school. He had the great good sense to call me up and say, if you'd like to get back in school, if you'll promise to do something useful with your life, I'll reinstate you so you can graduate. And I thought that was a pretty good deal, and I took him up on it. So June 6th, I graduated, and June 23rd, I was in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, taking basic training. Samuela Kremlin was my chemistry teacher, and she was a tough nut, but she had the ability to look past my extremely rough exterior and say, hey, here's a guy that probably has some potential. And she ended up making it possible for me to go to UVA for several days, live in a dorm, visit the various departments, and see what the various disciplines were about. In fact, that's where our last program originated, because I said, hey, that worked for me, and I think it'll work for other kids. And then Margaret March, my physics teacher, who once again was able to look past the warts and let me, I'm a better physicist than I am engineer. And I think it was because Margaret worked along with me and allowed me to develop in that area. So these are people that I owe a great deal in my career. So I'll go very lightly on the observations, but properly done, technology really is a very, very rewarding opportunity. I often say I'm the luckiest guy I know because I get to make a good living out of doing something that I would do for a hobby if I didn't make a good living from it. And I get to work with people that I like and respect. And I would say, on the other hand, if you don't feel comfortable with technology, I'd recommend running, not walking away from it, because that's your source of livelihood, because you're just not going to be happy with it. And I've met both people in both camps there. You do have to have a high threshold for boredom if you're to succeed, because it requires long periods of intense concentration on an isolated topic. Terrible grammar there. Anyway, I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. This is something I enjoy talking about. I'm happy that there are others of you who feel the same way that I do, and that is that spreading the word about technology is a very worthwhile thing. So, any questions?
Yeah, Joe, when you had, when we had talked on the phone, I'd asked you about, you know, like, what does it take to come up with an invention? And I very much enjoyed your answer, so I'm going to ask you the same question.
I hope I give you the same answer. I guess mostly hard work. Well, Edison said that inventing was 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration, and I'd only argue about the amount of inspiration. I've had a couple, well, quite a few of the inventions I've come up with came about because somebody asked me, can you think of a way to do thus or so? And very often the answer is, yeah, I probably can, but who cares? So I owe the people who ask those questions a debt of gratitude, because if I didn't know it was a problem, I probably, I give you a good example. I had a call from Houston, Texas, from International Paper. This is years ago. They said, can you think of a way to measure the amount of ink on a bread wrapper? And my immediate response was, yeah, but who cares? And it turns out the people who print bread wrappers care a great deal, because the ink costs as much as the material it's printed on. And as they change the design in the ink, the cost of printing it goes up and or changes. So I ended up designing a machine that would take the bread wrapper and tell you how many square inches of ink, and from that we could infer how much ink was required to print it, and you had a good control on the cost. But it turned out that wasn't what really worked. It was used, it ended up being used in the printed circuit board industry to measure area of traces and allow them to calculate current densities. And we sold maybe 10 in the bread wrapper business, and we probably sold 1,000 into the printed circuit board business. So you never know exactly how things are going to turn out. But a lot of my inventions have just been people saying, oh yeah, can you think of a way to? And I encourage people to ask those questions because I enjoy them. It's sort of the equivalent of doing brain teasers, I guess. Is that answer?
No, that was the answer you get. Yeah, because I always had figured invention was more of a exercise in, you know, a lot of creativity.
I don't know anybody who's been very successful at it who do it just to make money. They do it because they enjoy the challenge of it. I'm sitting beside a guy here whose name appears on a patent with me, and the Difliegenfache. Again, it just sort of happened accidentally, and it's one of those conversations that grew and turned into something that was commercially quite useful.
All right. Well, I guess I'll open the floor again to see if there's anyone does have a question.
By the way, is there anyone there from Danville? Well, I was just curious because we have a facility in Danville over at the Research Institute, or Institute of Advanced Learning and Research. And I was going to invite them. I'm down there from time to time. If they'd ever like to come over and tour it, I'd be happy to do so.
I will make sure to mention it to our Danville teachers, though. Thank you. Wonderful. So thank you so much for presenting, Joe. We very much appreciate it.